for attending this panel. We are already the second day of our forum and the last day before the social program tomorrow. Our panel, Weaponization of Food, the Importance of the Black Sea region of global security, organized in partnership with, beside the New Strategic Center, in partnership with the University of Agronomic Sciences and Veterinary Medicine of Bucharest, is unfortunately not a new subject. I have to say special thanks for each of our panelists, to Mr. Igor BURAKOVSKY, to Mr. Nkem and to Mr. Nigel SCOLLAN, and for their efforts to attend this forum and to be with us today. 2 years ago, because of the military conflict in Europe, we concluded that weaponization of food has to be seen as a risk for the world stability. And at that time, I didn't imagine that after 2 years we will facing the same worries. Let me present shortly our speakers. Mr. Igor BURAKOVSKY is head of the board, Doctor of Economic Sciences and Professor of Economics at the National University KHUMBAH Academy. His research interests include economic reforms in the countries on transition, regional and integration processes, international trade and trade policy. Participated in a number of international research projects and also worked as research fellow in Great Britain at the Birmingham University, in Japan, Economic Planning Agency, Japan Institute for International Affairs, in the States at Stanford University as Fulbright Scholar. He teaches international trade and international trade theory. Before joining the institute, worked as a senior economist and project manager at the East-West Institute Kyiv Center. Mr. Nkem is chairman, Africa Development Futures Group, and Michigan and Nairobi in Kenya. He is head of the Science, Technology, Innovation Policy Systems, Governance and Partnerships at the African Academy of Science in Nairobi. Chairman of the Africa Development Futures Group, faculty affiliate of the Science, Technology and Public Policy Program at the University of Michigan, and senior fellow with the Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils. He has worked extensively with the breadth of African science, technology and higher education bodies, including serving 2015 as founding executive curator of the Next Einstein Forum, Africa's Global Forum for Science, Policy and Society. His articles have appeared in journals like the New York Times and African Policy Review. He is a frequent speaker at conferences in symposia in North America, in Africa and Asia and South America. And not at least, Mr. Nigel SCOLLAN from Queen's University of Belfast is director of the Institute of Global Food Security, United Kingdom, and professor of animal sciences since 2016. He brings with him a wealth of experience in animal agriculture and associated supply chains, food research and knowledge exchange, as well as strong track record of partnering with the industry. His personal research field is focused on pastoral ruminant systems in terms of productivity, environmental impact, nutritional value and quality of meat and milk products, and reduced waste. He has published over 80 referred scientific journals, papers, and more than 200 books, chapters, and conference proceedings. The same time presented at numerous conferences and international meetings his research papers. He was president of the British Society of Animal Sciences and has been involved in many government, industrial, and academic forums. Chairman of the scientific journal Animal and director of the Oxford Farming Conference. Gentlemen, the floor is yours. Mr. Burakovsky, please, you have your floor.
First of all, I would like to deeply thank for an opportunity to come here and to discuss this very, I would like to say, eternal topic, eternal political and economic topic that's about food security in general sense and food weaponization in a narrow sense. Definitely, I have to present certain perspective from Ukraine, and then maybe I'll make a couple of general comments. First of all, I would like to say that when it comes actually to Ukraine, Ukrainian agriculture has been strongly damaged by the military aggression from the side of the Russian. According to different estimates, well, the total losses of Ukrainian agriculture would amount up to approximately 83 billion American dollars by the end of year 2025. I'm talking about actually the loss of the harvest. I'm talking the loss and disruptions, economic costs of the disruptions of logistics routes and other things. The most actually vulnerable sector of Ukrainian agriculture in terms of war impact is, of course, actually crop production, and out of this amount, more than the half, something about, well, 45, 46 billion dollars are the losses of the crop production. So these figures show that Ukraine, being one of the major agricultural products exporting country and producing country, well, needs to invest a lot of, to recover all these losses. My second point would be quite simple. When we are talking about the losses, so well, the losses could be discussed as follows. First of all, actually, this is direct losses to the crops. If you have military operations, definitely you cannot say about normal business, agricultural, any business. Point number two, actually, it's targeting from the side of Russia the infrastructure. The infrastructure, I'm talking actually about not only technical stuff, but for example, fuel supplies and some other things. Point number three, there's the problem and disruptions of logistics, especially in the Black Sea area. For us, it used to be very, and it has to be very, and will be very important, because up to 100 of crops exported from Ukraine is going through the sea routes through the Black Sea. And finally, actually, unfortunately, this is a new maybe phenomena in a way that, well, some stocks of grain of the previous harvest actually were simply seized by Russians, and they came actually to the international market and coming actually to the international market. So the comments are quite simple. Ukraine actually has a number of war incurred problems, but at the same time, this is my final statement for this, for the time being, is that, well, we are trying to be as efficient as possible in terms of negotiations on European Union accession. And right now, actually, we see that there is a number of problems with our neighbors, about actually the impact of Ukrainian grain export on the national producers. And of course, actually, it would be kind of challenge for the European Union to admit Ukraine, one of the biggest crops, and not only actually crops, grain producer and exporting country, not only in Europe, but maybe in the world. But in any case, Ukraine is ready actually to take the responsibility and actually is ready to provide our agricultural potential, well, to help the people, both in terms of normal business operations, and of course, actually, well, to help the people with the food security. Thank you.
Thank you. I think first of all, we are curious to hear each of you, and then we will. I will put my questions, and also I'm blessed we will can take questions from the auditorium. Nkem, please.
Sure, thank you. Okay, you can hear me very well. So I suppose I was invited because the Ukraine war and the effect on the food supply affected Africa substantively. So it's good to have a sense of the perception from that part of the world. So first of all, the reason why Ukraine has such good agricultural output and export and value to this region, both Europe, North Africa, and Africa, is because it invested substantively in transforming its agriculture into industrial outputs, so it could supply that much to the region, and it did that with the support of EU resources. Africa happens, North Africa especially of the Mediterranean, happens to be substantively desert, so the agriculture there is not as strong. And if you go a little bit down south towards the east and Kenya, where I live, you also have lots of dependency on some specific products from Ukraine. Now, upon the beginning of this war, when supply to the southern part, northern and East Africa was disrupted, there were lots of fallout. And the leadership of the continent instead saw it as an opportunity. Africa happens to have 60% of the world's arable land, 60%. So the African countries instead ask themselves, if we have this much land and we can help supply this much food to the world, why are we dependent on small Ukraine? That's the thinking of the continent. Why should Ukraine be supplying this large number of people when they can do their own? So the effect of these disruptions in the food supply chain instead caused African leaders to want to pivot from dependency to now looking for these very countries around the Black Sea who are so good in industrial agriculture to diversify and work with African countries to produce more agriculture from down there. There's also proximity, and there's even less of logistics and trade issues. It so happens that we're here in Romania. For a long time, in the 70s and 80s, Romania was a very good friend of African countries. Many African countries owe their... Still is, yes, you're right. At least my parents remember it much better than I do. It's my first time here. So this opens an opportunity for the Black Sea countries that, due to the war and its disruption, have developed a big diaspora now with the migrations of people from outside Ukraine, to look into how they can diversify and have Africa as an outpost for their agricultural productivity. Still tied to your own domestic industries, but that can be an outpost that serves much of the global south. It is the same dynamic that happens. Recently, you probably heard about in the US with President Donald Trump holding back on USAID and supposed aid to global south. There was talk of a large fallout on those who were dependent on aid. But the reverse happened. Those who were dependent instead saw it as an opportunity to break free and say, well, why are we dependent in the first place? So many of these disruptions, they instead caused the southern countries to say, well, we should do what we should have done in the first place. Invest and tap into partnerships with these countries that produce these products, but use it to strengthen partnerships by appropriating their technology, their models, their industries, to develop much more capacity down here for a much more bigger market, not independently, but tied to the original countries where these products come from. So for us on the continent, the African Development Bank, the heads of states on the continent, they are scrambling around on the short term to mitigate the effect of the food disruptions or supply disruptions, but also to use it to pivot and grow their own industries and complement the gaps that this war is causing. It's very clear that from discussions yesterday and today, the war is not going away anytime soon. If there were a ceasefire and all of that, the effect, the atmosphere is not going to be one that picks up agriculture instantly. So there's still room to have agricultural diplomacy, if you want to call it that way, with the global south, to complement yourselves, but also to supply to those who otherwise could do it, but for whatever historical reasons haven't been able to do it yet. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thanks. We are coming to Nigel. Nigel, it's working out.
Okay, thank you very much to my colleagues on the panel and to you for being here. And it's a special thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to come to Bucharest and participate in this very important forum. My background is very much in primary agriculture, and for the last 10 years or so I've had the opportunity to lead up a research institute which is very much focused on the whole area of food security. Now, I just want to dwell a little bit just to emphasize the importance of food security. Quite often we use those two words of food security. But what do we actually mean by food security? It goes well beyond the actual production of food. There's a big part of it which is to do with, yes, production of food, but a big part to do with the nutritional properties of food, what food actually does for us in terms of promoting our health and our well-being, micronutrients, macronutrients. There's a big part of it which is to do with the safety of our food, a big part to do with access to food, which we've already heard from my fellow panelists here, and the affordability of food. There are many important dimensions to food security. We have many challenges in our society, and we're discussing many of them at this forum yesterday and today. But I actually do food security within the Faculty of Medicine, Health and Life Sciences. So I'm surrounded by medical professionals, people who are dealing with issues such as obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and so on. And these have very strong linkages through to food and availability of food and quality of food. We also have big issues around environmental impact of our food, issues around the complexity of our food system. Our food system today very much is part of a global food system. Food moves in all directions across the world, and we've heard that from colleagues in the panel in the last few minutes. We're part of a complex global food supply system. But when we think about food security and food insecurity, we can talk about the ethical dimensions of food, but the security aspects, the absolute use of food as a tool in security and insecurity has been grossly underestimated. Yes, we've talked about it. Our chair mentioned at the beginning that this is not a new topic. It's not a new topic, but it's extremely important to understand how food can be used as a tool in terms of the weaponization of a situation. It impacts not just locally, for example, in Russia and Ukraine situation and around the Black Sea, but it actually goes all the way through the globe because of the way today we work in very much integrated global supply chains. Now, I'd just like to also note, and this might be teaching something to you that is relatively well known, but for me, doing some homework on this beforehand, it was not generally very well recognized to me, so I thought it important to emphasize. There's generally three big areas to do with the weaponization of food. Some of them we just had mentioned. One is to do with access to food, the simple access to food, including barriers that are established around access to food, and as we just heard, the elements of aid funding to support access to food. We also have the use of food insecurity as a tool for recruitment and retention of people who will help support a cause in war. And thirdly, we have the strategic targeting of agricultural infrastructure and supply chain infrastructure. And that third one is a really big element. So for example, when we come and we focus in on the war of aggression against Ukraine by Russia, then every component of the agricultural supply chain, from production on land through to distribution, as emphasized, for example, by the demolition of the port and the marine infrastructure, was very large indeed. Deliberate sabotage of the food supply system. Not only did that impact on Ukrainian people, on their abilities to directly access food and staple foods, but also the huge economic impact to do with the sale of their produce on global supply chains. Again, we heard a little bit of that mentioned. So it reminds us that that food has a big transnational reach. Okay, it goes beyond the local area and it hits globally. And that's something that's not as well recognized as it should be. So you're now getting food used strategically as a geopolitical tool. A geopolitical tool, food. So again, a little bit of repetition perhaps, but if we take a reminder of the figures in around the importance of Russia and Ukraine, 30% of global wheat, 20% of corn, 70% of sunflower. 70% of global sunflower is to do with those two countries. So you only need to have a little bit of a cold, not even a flu, in those two countries to have a big impact globally. A big impact globally. So even in the UK, where I am from, in a short time of the war starting, we had a big disruption in supply chains. There were empty shelves on supermarkets, something that was actually unheard of previously. We had a big increase in the cost of food, not just to do with the war, but other things, with around a 20% increase in the cost of food in around 2022, 23, and so on. That's a huge increase impacting on people. And that is deliberately designed to impact on people, to influence their political allegiances and so on. So to give you one specific example then of the impact of that Russia-Ukraine attack on marine, and this is data from sub-Saharan Africa, in the first year after the war, then Russia had a 39% increase in wheat into sub-Saharan Africa, and Ukraine had a 90% reduction. 39% increase in wheat into sub-Saharan Africa from Russia, and Ukraine a 90% reduction. That's major success in terms of the weaponization of food. And that allowed President Putin to talk about wheat and grain and oil seeds as being the new oil, if you like, the new oil. So I'd just like to conclude this part of my comments in that when we talk about food security, remember those dimensions that I indicated at the very beginning. Food security is has very many dimensions to it. But when we come to this aspect of weaponization of food, we should remember that food security is absolutely a matter of national and international security, and recognizing the long-range potential of food as a weapon across government structures and multilateral organizations is absolutely critical. That is actually quite new. The weaponization of food has been happening for centuries, but the way it impacts globally is relatively new. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. My question for all of you, coming out from and starting from your conclusion. At the first evening before our forum, we heard about a new book, A Free and Open Black Sea. Yes. Yesterday at the opening of our forum, I said about the influence of the local food security on the global security. If you are thinking that more than 70% of the exports of cereals from Ukraine are passing through Romania, and that the port of Constanța faces already as a critical hub for the maritime trade, how you are seeing to mitigate these effects of interruption of the supply chain at global level?
Well, a situation with Ukrainian agricultural logistics is as follows. Well, just after the start of the Russian aggression, actually, and we are very grateful to the European Union, there was a special scheme introduced, which was called Solidarity Lanes. And the idea was, you know, to somehow reroute the supplies of the grain. So, first of all, it was the so-called Black Sea Grain Initiative. United Nations, Turkey, and actually international community supported. And at the same time, actually, it was decided that some of the crops would go by the railways. And of course, it created the problems for our neighbors, because immediately you need to raise actual capacity of your railroads to process all the new, so to speak, cargoes coming right now. And of course, it created some problems, well, in our neighboring countries. We do understand that partly maybe this rerouting created some increase in transportation tariffs. So that's obvious, because economy is something which cannot be bypassed and cannot be cheated about. When it comes actually to the current circumstances, I think that what is really important when we are talking about right now Black Sea, we need maybe, well, a special security infrastructure for the Black Sea, take into account not only military aspects, but of course actually commercial aspects and food supply aspects. If you look at the map of the Black Sea, well, definitely majority of countries located on the shore of the Black Sea are belonging either to European Union and to NATO. So I think that maybe some military involvement need to be more pronounced, let's put it in such a way, in a very diplomatic way. Point number two, well, definitely actually, I think that if you are speaking about the security of the passage of ships, well, who knows? Maybe special sanctions need to be devised in order actually to penalize Russia not only for the war as such, but actually for their disruptions of the local routes. So I think that actually the complete answer to your question lies something in between politics, security, military, and commercial aspects.
Thank you, please.
Yeah, sure. Again, we're in a war zone, and there's lots of disruptions in life, in trade, in many aspects of what was normal in this neighborhood. And this also provides opportunities to think differently, to reorganize how relations between countries and trade routes are conceived. And so, in my view, especially for the neighboring countries, including Romania, is to reconsider what new opportunities does these disruptions offer? What new trade opportunities in how the countries cooperate in co-managing the war as a common neighborhood? but also how they handle their place in the global trade architecture. Because every disruption is an opportunity. And it can be specific to this area. The markets that received the grain from Ukraine especially, they are still there. Maybe even the Bulgaria, the Romanian economy can pivot a little bit more towards agriculture and fill that gap. Because in addition to the disruptions of trade routes, the productivity of Ukraine itself is lower now. So even if you could still provide trade routes for what is available to get to market, the volume is still less. So there's a big gap to fill. I think in the end, it is the thought process of the neighboring countries, the neighboring stakeholders, to see an opportunity that the disruption of one aspect can provide value on the other end.
But can we stabilize the global agricultural markets?
Very easily, not instantly. So when you think of short term, 1 month, 1 year, 3 years, it's difficult. Things are destabilized. But once you are in this kind of atmosphere, you are thinking of what new landscape does this provide for maybe 3, 4, 5, 10 years. Life goes forward, not instantly. So when you say stability, for me, I don't see it as an instant thing. But every disruption is a huge opportunity to come back stronger, to re-architecture everything better. Not only to think that, well, we have to put up the fires right now, the fires of what is not being supplied in the market, but how to even supply better next time around. It's conflict. It wouldn't be done immediately. But a new architecture, and a school like yours, can be the driving force in this conversation. How does this now, the main product we're talking about here is wheat and grains. That's what this area, this geographic area, offers the world the most as an asset. Well, look at the whole global marketplace for that. How come Ukraine was this important in this marketplace? What makes the Black Sea area this strategically valuable for that, to produce that? And how can it be done? The global population is already increasing. In Africa, for example, we're having a demographic boom down there. The market is already increasing. So if there's a short-term disruption, there's a long-term opportunity.
Thank you.
There's perhaps 2 points that I could add to what my colleagues have said on the panel. One, I'm thinking about really the infrastructure around how material can be exported. And yes, we're largely talking about wheat, grains, oil seeds, and so on. But the infrastructure, clearly to do the large export that's needed, the marine aspects and access to waters, rivers flowing off the Black Sea is absolutely critical. When we look at the disruption that happened in the first year of the war, when marine was not an option, then there was the immediate solution or attempted solution by moving to rail. Okay, but of course, to deal with things at scale, rail is not an ideal way of approaching it. But nevertheless, there was an effort. So the point is to do with infrastructure and security of that marine aspects, the ports and the waterways all around the Black Sea is absolutely critical. If you want to build resilience, then you need to look at alternative ways of getting food out. So rail was one way of doing it. But I understand, for example, we actually have an individual from Ukraine working in our institute at the moment. So I was able to engage and learn a little bit about problems. So, for example, when they moved to rail, then it was every wagon on a train that needed verification of the material and the quality and the content and so on. Whereas if you're moving by ship, it's the whole of the ship container. Okay, so the regulations around that, my second point, the infrastructure and the regulations really are really important areas to be working on to build resilience in getting food out within the context of supplying those global markets. So infrastructure and regulation and working across countries in this region is absolutely paramount.
Infrastructure needs money, and also we need safe food to bring, because this is also important to assure the security, but to assure also a safe food. Yes. Our region, the Black Sea region, because we are talking about Black Sea and Balkans, how can you see the role of all the trades in ensuring the food security for the countries, and I mean the countries from north of Africa, which are dependent on their grain export?
Yeah, again, I have mentioned, at the risk of being a little bit redundant here, there are disruptions in trade routes, but there's also a disruption in the supply itself and the overall architecture of supply and demand, and how do you get from the production to the consumer altogether. So for me, it's not a quick answer to say one action can address it, but to call on institutions like yours, like ours, to remap how this area became so valuable to the global supply chain and the trade routes, and how the consumer in Northern Africa, what even made them such consumers and dependent on Ukrainian or Black Sea area products. One can meet them there where they are, and not necessarily always look at creating trade routes from here. One can meet them, and this happens not only in agriculture. Agriculture seems to be the topic, and maybe a little unusual, but we live in an age where everything is weaponized. We've been discussing about hybrid wars. The whole war is hybrid. Agriculture is part of the hybrid process. Everything is a weapon. Everything is an asset and a strategy to use as a level for conflicts around the world. It doesn't matter what it is. We see that between the US and Asia and everyone else. So this does not have quick answers, but they require thinkers not to. There's a problem here. One wants to adapt what one is going for. The point of departure is what exists now. But how does one transition from that to think of something new and different? One is caught in a mindset that was pre-war, or how Ukraine provided this, and this was the route. It's a pre-war. The war has changed the game a little bit, and trying to patch up things from the pre-war, from the war era, I don't think can be optimal. One can instead look at the opportunity. I mentioned earlier at the beginning, Africa has 60% of the world's arable land. Why focus on still getting the same trade routes here, when you can go and do 10 times the same agriculture just south of the Sahara, where there's all that land, still with Ukrainian human capital, still maybe renegotiate the diplomacy between this region and the global south that you supply these products to. I think for me, that's how one wants to think about this. The market, one can go closer to the market and avoid future disruptions that still do the same thing. I really think that this war will not, the dynamics of Europe and conflict will not go away so quickly. Not so quickly. There might be some calm, but the dynamics will not go away. Other things will be disrupted. Meet your market where it is. We have seen Lebanon has had a conflict for a long time. Its diaspora is everywhere helping the global south in commerce and other things. We have seen other countries that had conflict. That created a huge diaspora that exported their assets from their home countries and become valuable to their host countries and still provided value to their home countries. So these dynamics, I think, can be exploited a little bit better. There's now a huge Ukrainian diaspora that can export these things and still give Ukraine good value in terms of its diplomacy and presence around the world. Same thing with the whole Black Sea area. I think one should just re-architecture some things around it. But anchoring on the pre-war mindset and architecture I don't think it would take one too far. Or if it takes one too far, it will be very short term. But on the long run, it will be a suboptimal approach.
Igor, you want to add something?
Well, again, maybe I would like actually to switch to more general things. I think that when we are talking right now about the wars, well, we are talking about security, military security, we are talking about cyber security, and I think that right now we need to talk about food security within the same package. Because very often, actually, we do understand, and I do agree with my colleagues, that your every competitive advantage could be your weapon. Could be a weapon under current circumstances. And here is maybe, well, there is a need, well, to some large scale, maybe multilateral negotiations under different auspices, how actually to secure the food supply. But again, I would like to come back actually to the basics of the economics. When we are talking about food production, it's a part of economic activity, so definitely there are interests of the consumers, and consumers are quite different in terms of their preferences and actually ability to pay for the food. And from the other side, it's about producers. So here is, well, again, we are coming back to the point, adequate supply, adequate quality, adequate logistics, and of course, actually, adequate prices. Then I think maybe, well, there is a need, well, I'm not an expert here, so that's why I'm just giving a kind of idea. Maybe, well, we need to rethink actually some mechanism which were used in the past. I'm talking about international commodity agreements or something like that, actually, to stabilize, well, this sector of the markets. So the prices and actually supply and demand, But of course, under current circumstances, well, it's something which seems to be very difficult. And actually, my final point is that food security should be taken on a multilateral basis and should be actually discussed maybe in some regional forums. This is maybe well, we are standing just on the eve of when making new international worldwide agreement on agricultural trade. On agricultural trade may be under the auspices of the World Trade Organization, despite of the pros and cons of the activities of this thing. And actually, I do believe that rule-based order is something which is really necessary here to ensure the security of food supply.
Thank you. Please.
Yeah, I'm just going to add a little briefly some thoughts, particularly in around what my colleague here said about increasing production locally, doing more in the country, in the African countries to produce more. Absolutely agree with that. But we also have to recognize when you come to things like wheat and other grains and oilseeds, you look at wheat, we actually walk a global tightrope in around the availability of wheat globally. There's only 1 or 2 days of supply of wheat globally, so it's a knife edge situation. So for me, there's an absolute need for wheat and indeed other foods to be optimized in around the production of that grain, for example. And when we come to production and we think about grain and other foods, these are heavily threatened by many factors today, including climate change and, for example, soils, water, nutrient availability. Producing food runs a knife edge on many factors. And there are countries which are better for various production input factors at producing foods than others. The key thing is that they're optimized when we're really focused on driving production and then, as we described earlier, getting that food out and distributed into local, national and international markets. This is not easy, and it needs a lot of local, national and international collaboration to secure food for society.
Coming back at global level, we are knowing that 2016 the United Nations developed the 17 Sustainable Development Goals until 2030. One of this is, for example, zero hunger, or the other, no war. We are now 2025. Yes, is it time to rethink the Sustainable Development Goals, or to act more quickly?
All right, I can try that one. I know even the UN itself recognizes that the SDGs will not be attained in the next 5 years. It seemed like they even knew this before they started, because the ambition was too high, the time frame was too short, and the commitment in political will and resources was almost zero. And I say that intentionally. So to suggest if it should be rethought about, I think so. And not only rethought about, but the mechanisms through which it was produced should be rethought about. The UN is the last system, and some countries dominate. And if it can be rethought about in a way that the weaker countries' voices can be stronger, then it would do better. I know that there was a big debate, almost, if I may say, a fight, around how the document should look like finally. What should be in there or what should not be in there. I know many African countries were not very happy with what ended up in that document, given that the needs of the more advanced countries and those of the less developed countries are not exactly the same. And it's pretty much the more advanced countries' mechanism for supporting the less advanced countries. So the time frame is long. The 2030 was an artificial timeline given by those who drafted it. They could give 20 years and be more ambitious, but involve the voices and aspirations of the Global South, who are supposed to be the biggest beneficiaries of that, and put them on the driver's seat. The architecture itself, I think, was flawed, and the political process was flawed. So yes, it will not be achieved. They know that already, and they're saying it all the time. There's no need following a dead horse. But in that next phase, aspects of agriculture, the needs, whatever they are, science and technology development capabilities. If Ukraine is this important in the agricultural value chain, it's because it adopted science and tech tools to transform its industry. Other countries want to do that. Things like that are not inside the SDG. So yes, if you're around the SDG, I would very quickly say that something should be rethought, be more practical, and put the beneficiaries, the majority Global South, at the driver's seat of that process.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add briefly, I think the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, yes, the time frame was unrealistic, 2030. But I think the framework that it presented, those 17 Sustainable Development Goals, have really given a key framework for governments, for businesses, at my end in a university, and for science society to really think that these are major issues globally. And when I think about, I come across them in university world through our research, through our education, our work with civic society a lot, but it's actually increasing. So I think we're having really significant impact through having that framework, and I think it will give us the energy to continue to focus on these well beyond 2030. And yes, it's a framework. It gives us a way of working together. Yes, it needs a lot of investment, but I think it's an extremely important tool for reminding us of the big issues in society.
I do agree with everything which was said by my honorable colleagues. I just would like actually to add two dimensions. First of all, we are living in a globalized world, and definitely a lot of things should be solved on the basis of global approach. In order to coordinate all these efforts, the instruments, policy instruments like Sustainable Development Goals are really necessary as a framework. Then goes the traditional problem, the problem of implementation. But don't forget that actually it's not about United Nations, it's about national governments, it's about the national societies. The national society, and here we are coming to eternal economic problem. Good intentions, but poor implementation. And actually, my last point is that unfortunately, right now we see that in some countries there is a certain retreat from sustainable development goals. I'm not actually naming these countries, but in order to produce more, for example, drilling in some countries, well, certain environmental regulations were suspended. And it's not only the country the president of the country who actually initiated this idea, drill, baby, drill, but it's also actually refers to the number of European Union countries. I'm talking about green transition, I'm talking actually all these problems with environmental protection. So actually my last point will be here that of course framework agreements and framework documents are very important, but of course we need to rethink and maybe to redevise somehow to coordinate the activities and to coordinate the actions actions at the global level. For me, it seems to me this is the most pressing problem. It's not only about sustainable development goals, it's about efficiency of the United Nations system, it's about the efficiency of some other global institutions, but that's the challenge. I will definitely believe that we'll meet and actually will solve this problem by joining our forces. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if you believe or not, but our time already comes to the end. I'm thankful and I thank you all for the participation. And before closing the panel, I want to announce the next panel which will start after the 10 minutes break. The next panel has the title, Why the Danube Matters, the Danube's Key Role in European and NATO Efforts to Keep Black Sea Free and Open. In partnership, this panel is organized with the Konrad Adenauer Foundation from Germany and will take place on the first floor. Thank you all and see you next time.